In the Queensland election, like the upcoming federal election, housing will be front and centre as well. There's seen record prices, higher interest rates, lack of rental properties. It means many people are being locked out of the market altogether. One particular group that's vulnerable is single women. Now, there are growing calls to allow this demographic to access their superannuation before they retire in order to buy their own home. Joining me now is Liberal Senator Maria Kovacic. She joins me here in the studio. Maria, great to see you. Why do you want to see this happen?
I think that it's really important for us to allow options for any Australian that wants to own their own home to be able to do so. Australian women over 55 are the largest growing cohort of homeless. I think it's critical that we actually look at what options are available to us to allow women to own their own home. And for me, I don't subscribe to the fact that it's not okay to access your super to buy your own home when you're 45 or 55, but when you're 65, you can use that same super to pay rent to somebody else.
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough, but also it does put pressure, if this was taken up by a lot of women, it puts pressure on them later in life, doesn't it? Because then they don't have that safety net to fall back on. Therefore, it goes back to the taxpayer and the pension system too. Isn't that the risk?
I think what it does, it actually gives women choice. So I think what we need to do is actually look at this issue holistically. And when we actually had the super system come into play, there was security of housing. Most people who wanted to own their own home could. That's not the case now. Women can make choices for themselves, as can any Australian, about how to best use their money. In terms of super, it doesn't mean that you don't have money when you retire. You can make decisions around whether you downsize or what kind of property you're going to buy. What it does do, though, it gives you a choice around your own economic security and your own financial independence, and they are really important things.
What do you think about the Prime Minister buying a new home on the Central Coast?
Well, it looks lovely. I saw it on the screen earlier. It's a long way from his electorate, but, you know, obviously might be somewhere for him to retire to, and, you know, it might be an option for him down the track, and, you know, that is a matter for him. And what I think is really important is that any Australian, particularly young Australians, and people that have been locked out of the housing market, like women in their 50s, have the option to be able to buy their own home if that's what they want to do. And that's what we are focused on.
Absolutely. But when you're talking about younger people in particular, they're comfortable with renting. The Coalition isn't on board with these build-to-rent schemes, but surely that's got to be part of the solution. Why aren't you convinced on that? It
can be part of the solution. What I'm not convinced on is it being the only solution.
Well, it's not the only solution, but the Coalition is not supporting any of this legislation at the moment.
The issue with the build-to-rent piece is that it actually gives power into corporate institutions, into institutional investors to be the homeowner, to be the owner of your home. So whilst it's important to embed rental protections, I don't see that the only path forward is to focus on build to rent as an avenue for young Australians in protecting rental security, when we actually should be looking at how do we ensure that we have sufficient supply? How do we ensure that federal governments incentivise local and state governments with appropriate infrastructure so that the housing that we do need is built, and anyone who wants to be able to buy that property can buy it, rather than saying the solution is build to rent, which actually pushes wealth from the individual Australian into corporate and institutional investors.
There has been some talk around APPA changing lending rules to be able to, you know, heavily, more evenly weight it towards first home buyers. Do you have a view on that, on where that should be, where the right line is?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we should...
Because even the banks are split.
Absolutely. So I think what we need to do is actually look at what avenues are available to us across the whole spectre, from, you know, entry to the market, from supply, from banking regulations. You know, you look at the assessment buffer, it's currently 3% on a home loan. That's an APRA guideline. Is that still appropriate? That's something that we might need to look at. Who does that impact? It impacts young people who don't actually have much of a deposit, who are actually still perhaps paying off their HECS, who actually have higher expenses because they're travelling to and from work, perhaps further away from where they would like to be because they can't afford to live near their work. So there are a whole lot of challenges there that we need to look at. And we need to make it simpler for people to own a home in this country if they choose to do it, not harder. And reviewing banking regulations and those associated prudential regulations are an important part of that.
Maria, thanks so much for your time. This issue is not going to go away, so imagine we'll be talking about it a lot in the lead up to the next election and beyond. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
A quick break here on AM Agenda. When we return, we are standing by to take